Okay, thanks for waiting, everyone. We're just waiting on one more person, but I think he'll be along shortly. So thanks everyone for watching, and thanks to all the candidates for coming. I'm Isaac. I'm the editor of the Oxford Student, and I will be chairing this hustings. I'm also a second-year PPist at UNIV. So for everyone watching, there's an interactive Q&A function, so you can submit questions for the candidates to answer at a later date. The candidates won't be able to see them during the Q&A, but please mark who the question is for so that we can direct them to the candidates personally and they can answer either you personally by email or on social media. And bear in mind that candidates can see who submitted the question, so please be nice. So these hustings will last hopefully until 7. We're going to start with a 1-minute speech from each candidate. We'll go in alphabetical order, so as to be fair. And then after the speeches, we've got 3 questions, 1 to each candidate. Each candidate will get their own question, and again we'll go in alphabetical order, and again each candidate will have 1 minute to answer their questions. So yeah, I hope this proves like fruitful and interesting for everyone watching, and I hope the candidates enjoy it and get a chance to show off their platform for SU President. So let's start in alphabetical order with a 1-minute speech from Anvi.
Thanks, Isaac. Hi, everyone. My name is Anvi, and I'm a second-year human sciences student at Malden College running to be SU president. I'm running because I want to make a genuine difference and take the SU back to being a union that fights for students' rights. Basically, the pandemic, I think, has shown that students were overwhelmingly neglected, and we need a good SAB team to take the SU forward and help Oxford recover post-pandemic. One of my main priorities would be increasing funding to welfare, as well as increasing its accessibility to suspended students. I'd also leverage my student press experience to be able to increase transparency around the SU, including publicizing better the types of motions that are passed at student council and big decisions made by the trustee board. Finally, I think there's many proposals that have been advocated for in the past, such as providing lecture capture and implemented, and I hope my track record could help make those things happen. The SU needs someone on your side, and you can count on me to be that person, and therefore I'd really appreciate your vote tomorrow.
Excellent, thanks very much for that, Anvi. And so next we'll go to Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm a 4th-year Maths and Philosophy student at Worcester College, and I believe I'm the best candidate here running for SU President. I think, as Anvi said, the SU really needs to be a union that fights for students. As we've seen in this pandemic, but since long before, university management and this government is actively hostile towards students' interests, and we need a strong force and an organised force to fight back against that. I have experience organising in political campaigns with the IWW and Acorn Oxford, both locally and nationally, and I believe I have the skills needed to organise students for students' rights and for students' interests. I think that it's incredibly important that we work again to fight sexual assault and harassment on campus, fight for welfare and mental health, and that we fight for fair academic standards. So I think you should really vote for me on tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ben. So next we'll go to Dara.
Sure. Thanks, Isaac. Hey everyone, thanks so much for coming. I'm Dara. I'm a second year at St John's. It would be an honour to be a SU president. Anvi and Ben both criticised the SU for not fighting for students, and I agree. But I believe it can be made to work for you. If elected, I hope to tackle discrimination and harassment, reform the mental health services, secure a partial tuition fee refund, get cheaper hall and isolation meals, and subsidise testing and quarantine for internationals. Being involved with SU campaigns, an ex-JCR officer, and having helped manage a team of over 60, I believe I have the experience, both within and outside the SU, to give it the fresh, positive start it needs to take it forwards. I look forward to answering your questions.
Hello friends, my name is Lionel Etisham. I'm a researcher and academician by profession, and currently I'm doing MSc in Sustainable Urban Development, and I'm associated with Kellogg College. Besides that, I hold PhD in accounting and finance. I have worked in different countries as assistant professor in India, KSA, Oman, and also worked in UK.
Then we'll go straight to Maddie.
Hi, my name is Madeline. I'm a second year PPist at Balliol, and I have to admit that I nominated for SU president in the pub because I was just really irritated with the SU that day. I felt a little bit let down, and I thought, do you know what? I have some ideas that I think will help improve the lives of students and really make a very pragmatic difference. I'm not expecting to win this election. I would appreciate your vote, but I want to have a conversation about pragmatic differences that could make a real difference. I think that the SU should not be the organisation necessarily to lead the charge. We have a system of common rooms here at Oxford, and Prescom has been absolutely wonderful at the beginning of this term in really representing what students want. And I think the SU's best role is in facilitating and accommodating the wishes and goals of common rooms and societies.
Okay, thanks very much, Maddie. So next we'll go to Marcin.
Hi everyone, I'm Marcin. I use the pronouns he, him, and I'm finally a lawyer at St. Anne's. And I'm running for the SU because I think it no longer does the job it was founded to do, and because I was so tired of constantly being told that it can't change when I was working with it for the last 2 years. I'm going to fight for better mental health provisions, for finally involving people who are not actually hacks, and for giving 50K for student societies funding after leaving the NUS and reducing the number of paid hacks that the SU employs, which is, I think, what Richard is suggesting in his manifesto as well. So vote for me if you believe that the next president needs experience, and if you believe that the SU finally needs to become representative.
My name is Richard Mifsud. Vote for me if you don't want an SU president next year. I think I'm going one stage further than anyone else dares, and I'm saying that actually it is not worth spending £21,000 on a person being president. I know that may not be the most popular view around, but I can assure you that my two running mates that I've got here, who's Fesby Bear and Moros Moose, both agree that I would be a terrible president. But if you vote for me, I won't be here. Because I am not going to take up the position. And not only will I not take up the position, I will also recommend to both the Oxford SU and Oxford University that they should not be funding this position. Now, I could suggest a whole range of things that you should be using £20,000 for instead, but that is beyond what I can do. What I can do is guarantee you that I won't be there taking the position, and we'll try and stop it. Thank you. If you want to find out more about Festival and Morose Moose, look at my Facebook page after this evening. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming. My name is Sophie. I'm a fourth year linguist at Teddy Hall, and I'm running because I want to bring back some good vibes to Oxford after what's been a pretty diabolical year. There's a large number of candidates for this election, and a lot of the major issues like provisions post-pandemic, better welfare resources, tackling harassment and discrimination, none of us really disagree on those issues. We'd be a bit stupid to run if we did. So what I do think is really important is having the right person to tackle those issues. You need someone who's open, communicative and honest towards the student body, and tenacious and diplomatic enough to take those issues to the university. Being SU Pres involves sitting on a heck of a lot of committees, so having someone who's experienced in that is really important. Call me naive, but SU leadership shouldn't be about who's the biggest BNOC or who's the best hack. It's about genuinely caring for the needs of the student body. And I think that my policies, a better SU online presence, increased support for student leaders, plans for student safety when nightlife starts again, are realistic and achievable within a year. This is especially important when it comes to big institutional issues like sustainability and decolonisation. Let's take it back to basics, because after all, we're not politicians, we're students. If you want a president who's honest, who cares, and who's generally quite an all right person, then you should vote Cause for Pres 2021.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. Vote for me, Stephanie, for SU President, for more outreach, post-COVID support, and improved career services. On outreach, I have two proposals. One, better leverage unique to target students from underrepresented backgrounds. And two, provide students with materials to reach out to schools in the area they are from. So many high schoolers just need to hear that they can go to Oxford too. While the pandemic may be over by Michaelmas, effects will linger. Students will need to be supported, whether due to symptoms of long COVID or other issues. Hence, we need a post-COVID support center. Finally, many of us found, including myself, that the job market is extremely brutal at the moment. We need to improve career services, which we can do by learning from the Ivy League. For example, they connect students applying for internships with students who landed those internships the years prior. So should we. In short, vote for more outreach, post-COVID support, and improved career services. Vote Stephanie for SU President.
Hi, I'm Rhoda, and I'm reading MSc in Contemporary Chinese Studies in LMH. I'm also LMH Star President and student rep for my program. I'm running for the SU President because as a student who came to Oxford with an unconventional background, I understand how sometimes it could be difficult and how sometimes you could feel alienated and have imposter syndromes, and that's why I want to improve mental health services to be more accessible for students and to provide a safe platform for everyone. I also want to improve the access to clubs and societies, especially for disabled students, and promote disabled sports in Oxford, because right now it's not very visible. And also, as a last point, I really want to suspend all financial punishments for students, because I think it could create inequality and unfair and should be demolished in Oxford. Thank you.
Thanks. I think Yanis finally.
Hey, I'm Yanis. I go by he, him pronouns, and I'm a fourth year at Keble doing history and French. I would love to be your new SU president, and I've got to admit I've never actually worked on the SU, just in various roles such as Freshers President and Ball President, but also as Social Sec for the OU LGBTQ plus Society. And often in the roles, even though I know the SU does a lot of work and tries really hard, sometimes communication wouldn't really work great, and that's kind of my main point I want to change. I want to make sure the SU is much more approachable and much more proactive, and in doing so I want to do loads for access, as well as minority groups and the environment, but also for welfare and mental health.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. So that's it for the first part of the hustings. Now we're going to move on to questions to the candidates. As I mentioned before, they'll each face three questions, and again, they'll go in alphabetical order and have 1 minute to respond. So for our first set of individual questions, we'll start with Amvi. So mental health features significantly on your manifesto. What can the SU do to improve mental health provision and support Oxford students?
Yeah, excellent question. So I think there's a couple of things that can be done. I think the first and most basic one is just to increase funding towards existing resources. So a lot of the times when people, for example, seek counseling or psychiatric help or anything like that, waiting lists that are there, and some people end up waiting many weeks or months to see a counselor, which I think like direct funding would just help combat. I think the second thing that can be done is increasing accessibility of those same resources to suspended students and those not in residence. I think this varies college by college, but standardization would be a third thing, so that regardless of where students are, what college they're at, that doesn't impact the amount of resources they're getting and the quality of resources that they're getting. And the final thing is, a lot of times welfare is linked to discipline, and I don't think people should be penalized for potential mental health issues. So that's what I was lobbying to change.
Thank you very much for your answer, Amvi. We have a question now for Dara then. So from your previous experience, could you give an example of an issue or policy that you've successfully managed to negotiate on behalf of people you were representing?
Yeah, sure. So one particular policy that I'd like to mention would be the so during my time at the Oxford Union, there was a controversy involving a speaker named Deborah So. I had conversations with senior leadership, particularly the president, and I made him more amenable to having a team of access officers help prepare him for the interview so that he could give that speaker the tough questions in order to ensure that the welfare of the Oxford community, particularly the Oxford trans community, was not damaged.
So most of the budget allocation in almost all major economies are allocated towards defense. So ultimate sufferers are education sector, health and social security system. If the defense budget could be curtailed, then education sector can get more funding and fee at the university can be reduced and revamped. The third question which was posed on me was my two policy priorities if I get elected. Fee reduction, number one priority is fee reduction, and second priority will be the huge investment on making students stress-free, happy, and futuristic.
So next we'll go to Madeline. How do you intend to work collaboratively with JCRs to achieve common goals?
So this is actually something the SU used to do. One of my policies is aimed at tackling increasing rents across Oxford and also standardising rents across colleges. What they used to do essentially is at the beginning of every term or every year, depending on the sabbatical officer in question, they would send out an online form to each JCR committee who would fill in the various charges that their college gave them, and they'd form a database which was then shared with all JCR committees so that they could go into any negotiation on charges fully equipped with the knowledge of how much exactly any other college was charging for the same product or service. This doesn't happen anymore, or if it does, you have to FOI to get the information. And I think that that was such a valuable thing that the SU used to do and should now do again, especially because rents in my college, as well as lots of others, have been going up well above the rate of inflation. Graduate rents for the university have been increasing above any marker of inflation, and also more than the amount that postgraduates get given every year. So, and there hasn't been an explanation for that, and there hasn't been much negotiation against it from what I've seen. So there was a relatively bad attempt at a rent strike last year, and I think that perhaps is a little bit extreme for most students, but this would be a really pragmatic, sensible thing to do to give JCR committees the leverage they need to go into rent negotiations fully equipped with the knowledge that other colleges are charging less, so that they can call out college staff members who say that they're not charging as much as other colleges, because I know that's what's happened at mine.
Thank you very much, Madeline. So our next question is for Martin. In your manifesto, you say you'd like to reduce the number of sabbatical officers from 6 to 5. Which one do you want to get rid of and why?
Thanks for this question, Isaac. I think that's a difficult question because I don't actually want to just remove one of the current ones. I just want to restructure the portfolios as well. So for example, I mentioned I want to give additional funding for student societies. I would love for us to have a VP for clubs and societies. I would love it for us to have a VP for welfare and some others, depending on how the JCRs would see the issue. But I don't want to just reduce one of the current ones and do not touch the others. I want to restructure all of it to make sure that the portfolios we have are not outdated and we are not having some issues in which we have too many people and some issues in which no one is actually working on them. I think society starts a huge part of the Oxford life, and it would be a terrible mistake for the SU not to support them and not to have one sabbatical dedicated for doing that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Martin. So our next question is for Richard. Virtually every student organisation in Oxford, regardless of its size, has a president. Why is the SU different?
Let me see. Nearly live, still waiting. Ah, there we go, I'm live. I'm not saying it isn't. I agree every single organisation in Oxford does have a president. However, no other organisation has one that requires £21,000 of funding towards it and requires taking out a whole year. And it's for this reason, this huge amount of money. I'm not denying that the Oxford SU may do some useful things. I'm just saying it doesn't do £21,000 worth of it. And if you ask most students, the random student on the street, what does the Oxford SU president do for them? Most of them will be scratching their head and wondering why. Certainly I did a straw poll amongst all the woolly animals in my bed, and none of them had a clue what the Oxford SU president did. And this came up with bright ideas such as trying to keep control of a committee or eating chocolate, but that was as far as they got. And I fear it might be the same outside of my representative pool. So yeah, that's why I think my campaign is really important and really useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. So our next question is to Sophie. So Sophie, your manifesto says you want to bring fun back safely. What would you do differently as SU president to improve the student experience at Oxford?
Yeah, great question. So I think I'm a massive fan of fun. I think fun's really important because I think it's something that's really lacking within the SU portfolio. Like a lot of you could say that a lot of the fun events happen through societies, clubs, JCRs and MCRs. So why isn't the SU supporting them to put on fun events? And I think the SU, so there's two ways that the SU can do this. They can support those bodies to run better events, and they can also run their own events. So like, I know everybody laughs at it, but like, stuff like the welfare dog walks and picnics and stuff. And it's also a great way to engage with the wider community. So I think like that, those are things that we can do really easily at a relatively low cost that can allow students to meet each other and just to get to know the SU in a bit less of a formal context, because I think that is something that's really lacking. And I'd also, the first thing I'd do as Pres would be to start my 3-step safety plan to make sure that people, especially freshers who don't know Oxford very well, can get home safely, find out where they can get help for drug and alcohol issues, and making sure that events are accessible to everybody.
Thanks very much for your answer, Sophie. So next we have a question for Stephanie. How do you plan to increase the general student body's engagement with the SU?
I definitely plan on putting the SU more out there. The SU should take more of a space up on social media, show the people that they're there, what they actually can do, and how they can support everybody equally as much at the Oxford student body. And I think that's the most important thing that the Oxford SU should do. They should really demonstrate what their strengths are and what they can achieve for all of the students out there. And the students should feel comfortable to go to the SU, to voice their opinions and their concerns, so that we as an SU can bring those to the university to make sure that their opinions are heard and that things can actually happen and the change can be made.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. So our next question is to Vlada. Your manifesto states that you want to push colleges to install safety systems into all college-owned properties, including off-site accommodation. Could you please specify what you mean by this concretely?
Thank you for this question. Yes, of course. The reason why I bring this to my manifesto is that somebody tried to break into my properties that owned by college, and there were no safety system like alarm or lights that switch on when somebody is nearby the house. So I want to install systems that would respect student and staff privacy, but at the same time would protect students. So I'm not talking about installing, lots of cameras or something like this, just something that would make you to feel safe and protected in your house.
Thanks very much, Vlada. So we'll go back to Ben since we had some technical difficulties earlier. So Ben, your question is, on your manifesto, you mentioned workshops on anti-Semitism for all freshers. What are the problems with anti-Semitism in Oxford, and how else do you plan to tackle it?
Okay. Yeah, so thank you, Isaac. I think anti-Semitism is an incredibly detailed issue that I don't think I can do justice in 1 minute. But as we've seen, like with the images coming out of London a couple of days ago, anti-Semitism is still rife in the UK and needs to be challenged wherever it crops up. I think that Cray does a fantastic job challenging racism here at Oxford, but as the incidents at St Peter's with Ken Loach showed, and also David Miller at Bristol, like anti-Semitism exists within the university context as well and needs to be challenged. And so I'm not sure exactly concretely whether it would be best to introduce training on anti-Semitism alongside the Cray workshops as a part of them or as an independent event or for freshers. But I do think that tackling anti-Semitism needs to be on all of our minds at all times, alongside tackling all forms of racism. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, so I think our university has a duty to give its students a baseline of education regarding climate change, and I think the best way that it could do it is by tying it into the fields that we are studying anyways. So for example, with French, you could potentially look at the Paris Agreement and see how France managed to get all these countries to one table and at least on paper agree to do something about climate change. And I think if we did that across the board with various subjects, that people could become more aware of what they can do in the future and how they can have an impact. And it just means that students leave this university as informed individuals, and potentially makes the entire climate crisis a bit more manageable and less overwhelming.
So that concludes the first round of 3 of questions to candidates. We'll now go on to the second round in the same order. So back to Amvi. What have you achieved as Cray president, and is there a reason that you've decided to run for SU president rather than finishing your year in Cray?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. I took over Cray between Hillary and Trinity terms, so I've only been on for, well, the VAC and a handful of weeks. And in that time, we basically had a couple of committee meetings, as well as we've had a BAME RepCom, which is a coalition of all of the BAME reps across colleges. In this time, essentially, we've discussed several important things, which I think will impact the stuff that we lobby for in the upcoming academic year. So one of those things is trying to see if we want to move away from the term BAME after last year's discussions that took place on race. And the second one is if we want to lobby all the colleges to have similar positions that exist. So for instance, some colleges call their reps with different names or have 2 BAME reps or 1, or some have a religious officer and others don't. And we'd like to push for standardization. So that's what I've achieved so far. But I think being SU Pres, I would get to work alongside a team of BAME women and only help push that agenda further, which is why I think it would be an excellent opportunity.
Thanks very much, Anvi. So now we'll go back to Ben. So Ben, NUS affiliation is expensive, and so what should the future relationship between the NUS and Oxford SU look like?
Yeah, so I think that's a very important question. I think, yeah, you're right, NUS membership. Am I live?
Yeah, I think so, Ben.
Okay, NUS membership is expensive, but I think we need at this time like a unified body for students from all universities to fight against the forces of both like marketization alongside the ECU and the commodification of education. We're all paying £7,000. Sorry, we're all paying £9,000 a year for this, and obviously we need to fight against increases to tuition fees. We arguably need to fight for decreases to tuition fees or their abolition. And for this, like, we do need a national body representing students. Whether it's fit for purpose currently, it's perhaps another question, but I don't think just walking away from the table is going to do us any good.
Thanks very much, Ben. So our next question will go to Dara. Dara, you've made manifesto pledges to make changes at college and university level. How do you plan to influence colleges and universities from an external position as SU president?
Thank you. That's actually a really important question. The first thing I would do is start a consultation with JCRs across the university. I would also engage with college leadership across the university, as well as university leadership. I would involve various SU campaigns in this process, because, I mean, here's the thing. Making these sorts of changes, the issues that I propose making changes about, these are very, very serious issues. They ought to be handled with the utmost care and concern. So I believe holding wide consultations before then taking action to move things to the university level, to streamline the process, to ensure that it's fair and transparent, is how we ought to go about it.
So the key points of my manifesto are students of the future. We students of University of Oxford needs to be futuristic and optimistic. A thorough plan needs to be envisioned to tackle the issues of mental and emotional health, especially in the backdrop of the global pandemic, which have affected almost everyone in one or another way. Second point in the manifesto is bombs or books. So almost all major economies spend chunk of their budget as on defense. So we must stand together to urge university administration and government in revamping the fuse structure of the university, curtailing down the defense budget. Next one is, dear Oxford, our beloved planet needs you. The whole world and humanity is at crossroads. Be the political institutions, scientific bodies, environment and economy, the whole world needs honest, human and efficient leaders.
So our next question will go to Madeline. What would you do to support gender equality in sport, and what can the SU do to support college sport captains?
Well, I'm actually currently involved in a campaign. So the the OUCC, the cricket club, the men's 50 over match has always been played at Lords, and the women have always played on the secondary ground, the nursery ground, and the nursery ground is now being dug up. So we're running a campaign currently to have equitable varsities in cricket, as there have been in rugby, football, rowing for several years now. So we're currently running a campaign to improve gender equality in sport. Another way I would do that would be to ensure that all spending in university sport is equitable. And sorry, I'm at home because I sprained my ankle this week, so my mum is just next door. But that would be a start. I think more equitable coaching, equal access to resources such as training grounds and facilities. As someone who plays a number of sports, some at university level, I know that hasn't always been the case for women and still isn't for many sports today. In terms of cuppers and college captains, I think that the SU is a wonderful administrative resource. It could provide so much more support in terms of match reports and just a little bit more coordination, because I know a lot of the time it's put almost directly on the shoulders of whoever is organising cuppers that year, so there can be a lot of discontinuity. I think as that would really take a lot of the burden off college sport captains and help more people step up and take on that role, because it's such a rewarding thing to do and encourages so many more people to get active, which of course, as we all know, really improves mental health and the overall experience of Oxford.
Thank you very much, Maddie. So our next question will go to Marcin. It's recently been revealed that Oxford received £11.9 million from the fossil fuel industry since 2015. What would you do to tackle this, if anything?
Thanks so much for this question. That's actually a good one, because I did mention climate emergency in the manifesto, and I think we need to work as the SU on making sure that we proceed with divestment, and that doesn't just apply to the university level, it applies to colleges as well, because a lot of them are still investing in fossil fuel companies. But I don't think it should stop there. I think we should go to the career service as well and make sure they don't actively advertise companies that do harm the environment. So I think it's not just about the money, it's not just about the divestment, it's also about making sure that there are no university or college institutions that are either financially benefiting from or actively supporting fossil fuel companies. And I think the SU is well positioned to act on that. We can coordinate the action across the entire university at both the university and the college level, and that's something that I'm actively committed to doing. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marcin. So our next question will go to Richard. So Richard, you're running on an empty chair campaign, but if you're elected, what involvement, if any, would you have with running the SU?
None. That's very simple. I am, like the majority of students, I fear, and not really seeing much value that the SU provides, because we're very fortunate in this university to have such excellent JCRs and MCRs. And the JCRs and MCRs do all of the useful things that we want them to do, like complain to college when they decide to increase rent unfairly, or complain to college when they don't provide any bar facilities, or ensure that socials are run, or ensure that, I'm sure, copious alcohol, although I am a teetotaler myself, so as more other people enjoying it than my woolly animals. So yes, that means that the JCRs and MCRs do such a fantastic job that the SU largely becomes irrelevant. Now, it does have a few small roles, like the Freshers' Fair, which they didn't manage to organise well this year. It's an example of a role which they do usually do well. I'm looking forward to the return of the in-person one. So yes, I haven't planned to have much role at all, is the answer to that.
Thanks very much, Richard. So our next question will go to Sophie. Sophie, you spoke on your manifesto about decolonising the curriculum. What else can the SU do to promote racial equality in Oxford?
Yeah, thank you for this question. This is great. So I think one of the big things I've realised when running for this campaign is how incredible the force of the student body is, and how many organisations there already are, like Cray, Uncomfortable Oxford, like lots of these, and then kind of individual student campaigns and organisations. So I would work with them. So one of the things I spoke about was setting up a decolonisation forum, which is what I called it. So that could be a literal online space, because one of the things I want to do is improve the SU's online presence, but also conducting surveys and kind of in-person consultations as well with the student body, so we can actually find out how, because decolonisation is such a huge thing, and we need to find out what the students actually want and what we need to aim for, so we can take that to the university, and I can work with the decolonization working group. Torch has a decolonization thing going on at the moment, and the racial equality task force as well, in order to actually take them an accurate and achievable representation of students' views on decolonization.
Thanks very much for your answer, Sophie. So next we'll go to Stephanie. What do you think that your general negotiation strategy will be in talks with university leadership? Do you have any specific ideas to uphold diplomacy, or do you plan a more confrontational approach?
I think I would go for the more confrontational approach. In essence, for me, the most important thing is listening to the student body and just voice their opinion and their concerns to the university. And I think we should just lay out their issues and their problems so that we can actually solve that. And I strongly believe that with reshaping the university back to this new normal post-COVID, we get this wonderful opportunity to basically kind of restructure the university in a sense how it works for the students. And this is just such an amazing opportunity to make it work for everybody in essence. And one of the ideas that I have is to make this online idea box on the SU website where students can just submit their ideas of how to improve things. And we can look at them, see what works, what doesn't, talk to the students who submitted them, and then go to the university and try to negotiate our way in.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. So next, Vlada, what are the most important improvements to be made in the provision of mental health services, and how will you facilitate them as SU president?
I think the most important is that we need to increase the capacity of mental health services and reduce the time of waiting to access them. Because right now it's really difficult to access the services, even we have lots of options, but services are overwhelmed with students' requests. That's why sometimes you need to wait a week, 2 or months until you reach the services. So we need to first lobby colleges to employ psychiatrists so they could access students more easily, and students could know that they could go to their college psychiatrist and ask for help or just talk. And then I think we need to increase the capacity of mental health lines, because for example right now these lines are not working outside of term times. That I think is ridiculous, because if it's vacation doesn't mean the students accidentally stop having any problems. So yeah, that's my main goals.
I think the combination of the workload that Oxford has combined with the pandemic just means that a lot of people currently are in need of more care than usually, and thus I think that we need a massive expansion of counselling services to make those waiting times shorter. But also, as we do that, I think we need to make sure that they become more diverse so that people who aren't cis, white and straight feel comfortable going to these counselling services and talking to these people about very personal problems, and feel like they have someone who can relate to them on the other side, and not someone who's just gonna throw some very generic advice at them.
That is the end of our second round of questions. Thank you to all the candidates. So now we'll move to our third and final set of individual questions, and again 1 minute to answer, and we'll go in alphabetical order. So Anvi, how will you improve student engagement with the services provided by the SU?
Yeah, I think actually that's one of my biggest priorities, is to actually use what the SU has and make sure that the students know that it exists and use it. I think the first thing you could do is increase the online presence of the SU. So this could be done through, for instance, takeovers on the SU Instagram page by people that run different services and campaigns around the SU, so that we know what exists within the SU, what the SU's jurisdiction looks like, and what kinds of services you can get access to. I think the second thing goes back to how I used to work with the student press, for instance, can cover issues that students are facing, and then link, for instance, resources that the SU can provide to combat those issues. So that could go for anything like mental health issues or race issues or anything it may be, the student press can help get exposure to the SU services that exist. I also think a fresher's induction for what the SU is and what it can offer would be really, really helpful.
Thank you very much, Ambi. So, Ben, you pledged in your manifesto to support the campaign to introduce a reading week. What's the case for a reading week at Oxford, and what alternative policy would you introduce to decrease the burden on students if this is unsuccessful?
Yeah, so I think obviously welfare has been spoken about by a lot of the candidates here, and while I think the counselling service, an increase in something like that is vitally important, I also think we mustn't ignore the fact that like we can tackle welfare or welfare issues sort of before they come about, right? Like I don't think anyone here would deny that the workload at Oxford is intense. And I'm not sure that this like level of intensity is absolutely necessary, right? We have these 8-week terms, we pack everything in, and then we have these long vacs where we continue working, only slightly less hard. I think the case for a reading week is really strong in that our terms are shorter than any other university, and largely that is because colleges need to rent out rooms to conferences over the vacs, and therefore they're hesitant to let students stay a bit longer. Cambridge SU recently introduced a policy for a week. They have a slightly different system with their week structure, but I think that's certainly something that Oxford could follow. As for other policies that might do the similar thing, I think tackling workload is really important. I think it's worthwhile surveying students across colleges and subjects to make sure that no students are being set unduly unfair amounts of workload, and also make sure that colleges are being excessive in their workload setting, so that people have a broader picture of how much is fair and how much other people are working, so that no one is working too hard and ending up in a poor situation as a result.
Thanks very much, Ben. So Dara, the Student Council is Oxford SU's legislature, and it has delegates from all of the common rooms with the power to mandate sabbatical officers to issue statements. What would you do if you were mandated to publish a statement which went against your political views?
Again, my job is to represent the students of Oxford if elected. My political views do not factor into that whatsoever. That's it. My job is to represent them. So if the Student Council makes a decision on behalf of these students, I will follow as they say, as is my job, because that's my priority.
And the last question which was posed to me, that is there any example of my working with the university students and administration? So I would like to cite one example. During my stint as warden of boys hostel in an Indian university, 2 students group fought at a petty issue and they injured each other. It was really very nasty scene at that time. And police intervened and higher authorities wanted to rusticate all the students, but I have successfully negotiated with police, and university administration reduced the punishment as just few days of supervision, a few days of suspension, and now all those involved are very successful in their life. So I'm not going to motivate the students to fight, but at least we know that the students are at a different level. We are not students, we are not like mature, so sometimes it happens. So this is my speech on Hustings. So thank you so much for listening me. Thank you so much.
Madeline, your manifesto involves a database for college rents and other charges for common rooms. What would you do if colleges or common rooms are not forthcoming with this information, and how would you lead common rooms more generally in rent negotiations and advice?
To be honest, I think that there's been a lot of rhetoric from colleges on the financial fallout of COVID-19. And I think although returning to Oxford and returning to the nightlife and all of that fun stuff, as Sophie says, is a great thing and a wonderful thing, it should definitely be celebrated. The financial impact is going to hit us soon, I think, and I think therefore the rent discussions will become more pertinent. So I think JCRs will be quite keen, as they were in the past, to collaborate so that the charges across colleges are fair. The university has already been discussing further standardisation procedures in its own meetings, so I think they would also be supportive of measures to try and improve that across colleges. I mean, look, my overarching position is that I think the SU should support common rooms and societies. I think that's its role really within Oxford. I think that's what it should be doing. If the common rooms don't want something that I'm proposing, that's fine. You know, we can move on to something else. But that's my main position. I want to be led by common rooms because most students interact with their common rooms and not with the SU. And I think that that would be a far more representative model than the one that's currently in use.
Thank you, Madeline. So, Marcin, you mentioned in your manifesto that you think that the SU should disaffiliate from the NUS. What are the problems with the NUS and why do you think the SU should disaffiliate?
Thanks, Ida. That's a fantastic question. I think the problems we have with the NUS are the same ones we have with the SU at the local level, but just exaggerated because of the scale of the whole thing. The NUS is getting continuously accused of being an anti-Semitic organization. Is not representative in any way of students. It's basically, it has the same level of engagement that the SU does, but nationally, so no one even knows what it is that they are doing. If I were to just go on the street now and get into the main quad of my college and ask them if they know anything about the NUS, if they know a single current NUS officer, if they know any single NUS policy, they are not going to know that. The NUS does not care, and we shouldn't care either. We're sending them £26,000 every single year. Just imagine what we can actually do with that kind of funding for societies. Currently, the SU does not provide a single p of funding for student societies at all, so we can change that. And aside from that, I think it's still a decision that needs to be taken by the students. So I would still do a referendum on that, but I just think that the NUS is extremely unrepresentative, and just giving that money for something that would actually make a better use of it is a good way to go for the SU. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Marcin. So, Richard, I know you don't want to personally be involved with running the SU, but how should the SU be involved with supporting student societies and common rooms?
Well, that's an amazing question. I mean, to be honest, has it? I mean, in this year, half of the student societies who weren't sports societies didn't get a chance to be on their Freshers' Fair. To the extent that a whole group of them went off and made a non-official Freshers' Fair, so that they at least had some way of getting some students. Sports societies would charge obscene amounts for presenting at Freshers' Fair, so whilst they could get a slot, they had to spend an awful lot of money, and they all blamed SportsFed, but actually SportsFed were already subsidising half the cost that the SU were charging them. Vastly more expensive doing this online one than any previous one. And the JCRs and MCRs, most of them don't seem to have any talking to the SU, and instead you just have this SU council, which seems so out of touch with the general population. So at the moment it's not fulfilling its role at all, which is why I don't think it needs a paid president, and hence my entire campaign. So yes, apologies for my joviality.
Thank you very much, Richard. So, Sophie, in your manifesto you spoke about creating online and in-person spaces for students. How would you improve general student engagement with the SU?
Okay, so I think this is really important. The SU website is a bit of a mess, let's be honest. It's not a great experience, and there's lots of dead links, and it's just not the integrated, comprehensive service that it should be. And I think that's really, really off-putting to people when they log onto the SU website hoping to find out some information and there's just nothing there. So I think, I personally know naff all about IT, but I think that's one of the things that would be really worth investing in if we have the money to do so. Like, obviously that's not information that I have right now, but financially, if we allow it, I think creating a better space. So once students log on with their SSO, they can access like a hub. So when I ran for welfare VP, I suggested like a hub for welfare reps on the SU website. And I think that can just go down the scale. So you can have a section for JCR preses, MCR preses, societies, clubs, welfare reps, etc., etc.
Thanks very much, Sophie. Yeah, thank you very much, Sophie. So next, Stephanie, what do you think will be your general negotiation strategy in talks with university leadership? Do you have any specific ideas to uphold diplomacy, or do you plan a more confrontational approach?
Isaac, I think we already had this question.
Ah, I see. Yes.
Do you want to go for one of Etisham's questions?
I will do that, my bad. Yeah, so from your previous experience, could you give an example of an issue or policy that you successfully managed to negotiate on behalf of the people you were representing?
Thank you for submitting that question. I actually instigated, during my time as MCR Vice President, the weekly walking scheme. As well, during lockdown, as you know, we cannot really go anywhere. We were stuck at home. Back in Michaelmas, it was all going downhill, which is very understandable in the current COVID times. However, we did want to do something to increase people's welfare and well-being. And essentially, I instigated the weekly walking scheme where people were able to go outside with one other buddy, go for a walk. We would match them up and they were able to grab a bite to eat on the MCR. And that worked out so great. We heard so many loving reviews about that one thing that we did, and it made my peers so happy, and they were just able to push through and continue with their studies.
Thanks very much for your answer, Stephanie. So for our final question, Vlada, in this role, you would represent both undergraduate and graduate students. How would you plan to balance this?
Thank you for this question. I think, first of all, we need to understand what graduate students need and what undergraduate students need, because sometimes it's a bit different, and sometimes we need to think and to talk with students, to ask them, what do you want, basically? And that's why, for example, I know that because the graduate body is more international, we need to focus more on international scholarships. We need to focus more on graduate accommodation, because sometimes graduates are not guaranteed accommodation in college. But with the undergrads, we need to support more tutoring system. We need to support more peer support. We need to help them to write their essays, to focus on their exams. So I think we need to work closely with JCR and MCR presidents to understand the students' needs and to understand what particular group of students needs.
I'd say currently most students have too much information coming in, not just from the SU, but just in general. So I think a great way of decreasing that would be to work with JCRs and MCRs and potentially combine the SU newsletter with the JCR MCR newsletter and send it as one email instead of separate ones, because it just becomes a bit overwhelming, and I'm worried that a lot of people don't actually ever read the SU emails. And then on the other hand, I also think the SU needs to be quicker at responding, and also around when it's not necessarily working hours, because I think the worst thing as a student is if you don't have time throughout the day because you've got a degree and you've got, like, I don't know, if you do chemistry or something, you've got labs all day, and then you need to talk to the SU, and then they can't get back to you until the next day because they're off work from 5 p.m. onwards. So I would want to make sure that I'm not unavailable after 5 p.m.
That's all of the questions we have for our candidates. So thank you to everyone who's participated in the hustings. You've all been fantastic and you've all run great campaigns. Thanks to everyone who's watching. I urge you to go and check out the manifestos on the SU website. They've been a lot of thought and hard work gone into them, and they're very interesting. Voting opens tomorrow at 8 a.m. and closes on Thursday at 6 p.m. So please, everyone, go and vote. Tell your friends, share your manifestos, campaign for the candidate who you like the policies of the most. But yeah, please remember to vote in the election, which opens tomorrow. Voting is on the SU website. You can find links on Twitter and Facebook if you're struggling to find the actual voting link on the website. Again, thanks very much, everyone, for coming, and thank you to all the candidates. You've been fantastic, and good luck in the elections, guys.